I thought this meeting was just a coincidence. It was an ordinary Thursday. I had left work earlier than usual after a draining day and needed to clear my head. I wasn't planning to go anywhere in particular, just walking, hoping that movement would shake off the heaviness I was carrying. That's when I saw it, a small coffee shop tucked between a flower shop and a laundromat. I'd passed by that street 100 times before and never noticed it. I went inside. It smelled like cinnamon and espresso, and soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner. I ordered a cappuccino and sat down by the window. I remember scrolling through my phone, not really reading anything, just passing time. That's when I saw him. He came in a few minutes later. Worn leather jacket, messy hair, holding a book. Something about the way he looked around the place felt familiar, like someone who was trying to find something he'd lost. He sat 2 tables away from me and ordered a black coffee. We didn't speak at first, just shared a few glances. It wasn't love at first sight, it wasn't even flirtation, but there was something in the air, a strange kind of awareness, like we both noticed something that we couldn't explain. After 20 minutes, he got up to leave, then paused by my table. "Do you come here often?" he asked, half smiling. Cliched, I know. But something about his voice was warm, a little uncertain, which made it feel genuine. We talked for maybe 10 minutes, nothing deep. Weather, books, how neither of us had noticed this place before. He told me his name was Daniel. I told him mine. He asked if I'd be around the same time next week. I said maybe. I didn't think much of it. I thought it was just a random meeting, one of those pleasant city moments that come and go. But I went back the next week, and he was there. We sat together this time, talked for over an hour. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. I remember thinking, I needed this. That became our thing. Every Thursday around 5, we met at that little coffee shop. We never planned it formally, but we both showed up. And over the next few months, something shifted. We went from strangers to something more. But it wasn't a fairy tale. Real life still existed outside that coffee shop. We both had baggage, things we didn't talk about right away. But for that hour every week, we were just 2 people learning to be seen again. And now, a year later, I know one thing for sure. It was never just a coincidence. That meeting was exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it at the time. It didn't fix everything, but it reminded me that sometimes the universe gives you small moments that nudge you back to life. After months of seeing each other every Thursday, the cafe became more than a meeting spot. It felt like ours. Our laughs filled the small space, and even the barista started remembering our orders. Those simple rituals started meaning something. A comfort, a rhythm. One Thursday, I arrived to find him already waiting, a small pastry set at the seat across from him. "You mentioned you liked these," he said with a smile that made my chest warm. I hadn't even remembered saying it. That night we stayed until closing. We talked about everything and nothing. Our worst jobs, the music we grew up with, what scared us. He told me about his divorce, not all at once, but in pieces. A few sentences one week, more the next. No bitterness, just a quiet sadness in his voice. I didn't press. I knew what it meant to carry pain you didn't know how to release. I shared my own history too, burnout. How I sometimes felt invisible in rooms full of people. How I played the strong one until it broke me. And he listened, really listened. It made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. We started texting during the week, silly jokes, random thoughts, checking in. When he sent me a photo of his messy dinner attempt with a caption that said, "Chef of the Year," I laughed so loudly I startled myself. It had been so long since something simple made me happy like that. We never defined what we were. We hadn't kissed. There were no confessions. But something was growing between us that neither of us could ignore. Then came the silence. One Thursday he didn't show up. No text. I waited an hour, then another. I told myself not to overthink. Maybe he was stuck at work. Maybe something came up. But when a week passed and he still hadn't replied to my message, I felt something crack inside me. It was a familiar ache, the feeling of being left hanging, of expecting something and being met with silence. I thought I was past that kind of pain, but apparently not. The cafe felt emptier the next Thursday. I still ordered our usual, hoping, but he didn't come, and I didn't hear from him. Maybe it really was just a coincidence, or maybe it was something more that ended before it even had a chance to begin. But even in the confusion, part of me still hoped. Not because I was naive, but because connection, real connection, doesn't come around often. And I wasn't ready to believe it was already over. The following days were filled with a strange silence. I went through my routines, work, errands, cleaning the apartment, but everything felt slightly off, like the air was heavier. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, only to fall again when it wasn't him. I kept wondering what had gone wrong. Had I said something, missed a sign, was he hurt? Or had he just changed his mind about me? The overthinking became a loop I couldn't escape. I found myself checking his social media, searching for clues, any kind of activity. But there was nothing. No posts, no likes, no updates. Just a blank space that only deepened the confusion. My friends noticed something was off. One night, at dinner, my best friend asked, "Are you okay? You've been really quiet lately." I wanted to say something, to explain. But how do you tell someone you're grieving a person who was never officially yours? Instead, I just nodded and said, "I'm fine." And that lie sat in my throat like a stone. I debated going back to the cafe the next Thursday. Part of me felt pathetic, like a fool hoping for something that was clearly over. But another part of me needed the closure. So I went. The place looked the same. The smell of cinnamon and espresso. The barista gave me a small smile, recognizing me. I sat at our usual table, ordered our usual drinks. The seat across from me stayed empty. And still, I waited. Every time the door opened, I looked up, hoping, but each time it was someone else. A young couple, an older man reading a newspaper, a woman with her toddler. Life went on, as it always does. That evening, as I walked home, I realized I was holding on to something that no longer existed. Not just him, but the version of us I'd built in my mind. Maybe he did feel something once, maybe it was real, but whatever it was gone now. I didn't cry that night, I just sat in silence, finally accepting what I hadn't wanted to admit. He wasn't coming back. And still, somewhere deep inside, I hoped he was okay, that wherever he was, whatever he was going through, he'd find peace. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew I had to stop waiting for someone who had already let go. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started caring about myself. The days after that felt quieter. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes anymore. I wasn't replaying every conversation in my head, trying to decipher hidden meanings. I think I had finally hit a point where my heart was too tired to keep breaking. I started pouring my energy into other things. I went back to the gym. I read books that had been sitting unread on my shelf. I called my mom more. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in a while. Slowly, I started filling in the silence he left with other voices, other pieces of life I had put on hold. But healing isn't linear. Some mornings, I'd wake up with that familiar pang in my chest, reaching for my phone, half expecting a message that still wouldn't be there. I'd sit by the window with coffee and wonder if he ever thought about me. If he regretted disappearing, if he ever wanted to explain. And then one Thursday, weeks later, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in so long I almost didn't recognize it. It was him. Just one sentence. "Can we talk?" I stared at the screen for a long time. My first instinct was anger. After all that time, now he wanted to talk? But beneath that anger was curiosity, and deeper still, something softer. The part of me that had never really stopped hoping. We agreed to meet at the same cafe. I arrived early, my heart pounding in a way I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I expected. An apology? An explanation? Closure? When he walked in, he looked different. A little older, tired, nervous. He sat down and didn't say anything at first. Then finally, he looked at me and said, "I'm sorry." Not just for leaving, for not knowing how to stay, for letting fear and confusion drown something that mattered. We talked for hours. About everything. What he'd been dealing with. Why he pulled away. How he had thought about reaching out 100 times and hadn't had the courage until now. I didn't know what to do with it all. Part of me wanted to guard my heart. Another part of me wanted to believe people can change. By the time we left, nothing was decided, but for the first time in a long time, something felt open again. And that was enough. The next few weeks were filled with cautious steps. We texted again, this time more regularly, but with a different tone. Slower, gentler. There was a certain honesty that hadn't been there before. He didn't pretend everything was fine, and neither did I. We were careful not to make promises, but both of us were trying, and that effort meant something. We met a few more times. Not every Thursday, but enough to feel like we were rebuilding something, brick by brick. The laughter came back, though more reserved now. The silences were still there, but they felt less heavy, more like pauses between thoughts rather than walls we couldn't break through. One evening, after a walk through the park, he stopped and said, "I'm scared I'll hurt you again." His voice cracked a little when he said it. I looked at him and replied, "I'm scared too, but pretending I don't care would hurt more." That moment wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks. Just two people standing in front of each other, afraid but honest. We decided to take things slow. We didn't label anything. It wasn't about rushing back to what we were before. It was about learning who we were now, with everything that had happened between us. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I doubted myself for letting him back in. Moments when I questioned whether I was just setting myself up for more pain. But there were also moments like when he remembered how I take my coffee without me saying it, or when he sent a photo of a book he thought I'd like that reminded me people can come back differently. And I was different too. Stronger, a little more guarded, yes, but also more aware of what I deserved. We still met at the cafe sometimes, but we also started creating new memories, trying new places, walking unfamiliar streets. It felt like we were rewriting our story, not erasing what had happened, but adding new pages to it. There were no guarantees, no clear path forward. Just two people trying. And for now, that was enough. The days grew warmer and our conversations deeper. We were no longer just reconnecting. We were rediscovering each other. Sometimes we met after work and walked without a destination. Other times we cooked together at my place, burning half the dinner while laughing over spilled wine and forgotten timers. Still, it wasn't perfect. One evening, as we stood on my balcony watching the sun dip behind the buildings, he told me about his childhood, about the father who left when he was 10 and the silence it created in his home, about how he had learned to bottle things up because that was the only way he knew to survive. I listened, holding his hand, trying not to interrupt his story with questions. Just being there felt like the only thing I could offer. Another night, I shared with him my own fear of being abandoned, of people getting close, seeing the mess beneath the surface, and deciding it was too much. He didn't say much, but the way he wrapped his arms around me, firm and quiet, said enough. We didn't need to say everything. But the vulnerability scared us both. The closeness we were building was fragile, like glass. Beautiful, but breakable. I could sense the moments when he'd go quiet, like he was retreating into himself. It still made me uneasy, but I stopped trying to fix it immediately. I was learning to give him space, and he was learning to not run from it. One day, we took a weekend trip to a small coastal town. No big plans, just the sea, good coffee, and long talks. There was a moment when we were walking on the beach, barefoot, the wind tangling my hair, and he reached for my hand. He didn't say anything, he just held it. And in that silence, I felt something settle in me. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for a message or an apology or a version of him that didn't exist. I was here with the man in front of me, the one who had disappeared, the one who came back, the one who was still figuring it out, just like I was. We still didn't call it anything. Maybe we were afraid that giving it a label would make it feel too heavy again. But I knew what it felt like. Peace, even if it was imperfect. That night, back in the little hotel room, I looked at him as he slept and realized love doesn't always arrive wrapped in certainty. Sometimes it comes with pauses, with breaks, with a past you have to unlearn. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a question mark in someone's life. I felt like a choice. And maybe that was the beginning of everything. Things began to shift again, not in a sudden dramatic way, but slowly, like seasons changing. We were back into a rhythm, seeing each other regularly, spending weekends together, even talking about taking a longer trip someday. But I started noticing the little things again. He'd get quiet after certain conversations, especially when I brought up anything long-term, jobs, moving, families. I never demanded answers, but I needed to know if he was still with me, not just physically, but emotionally. And sometimes I wasn't sure. One evening, I told him about a work opportunity in another state. It wasn't set in stone, just a possibility, but it sparked something in both of us. "Would you go?" he asked, avoiding my eyes. I shrugged. "I don't know. Depends." He didn't say anything after that. For the rest of the night, he was distracted, and when he left, he didn't kiss me goodbye. The next morning, I found a note on my kitchen table. Just 2 lines. "I don't want to hold you back. I'm sorry. My stomach dropped." I called him. No answer. Texted. Nothing. Days passed. A week. My apartment felt colder without him. The coffee shop? I couldn't bring myself to go. It was like our entire timeline had suddenly been erased, like he'd folded it up and tucked it away somewhere I couldn't reach. But part of me understood. He was scared. Maybe of change, maybe of losing me, maybe of facing himself. Still, I was angry, not just at him, but at myself, for letting it hurt so much, for thinking we had finally gotten somewhere real. But I also knew this. I wasn't the same person who walked into that coffee shop a year ago. I had grown. I had let someone in. I had loved. And even in his silence, I could still remember his warmth, the way he once looked at me like I was a miracle. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't let this break me. Because even heartbreak is proof you dared to feel something real. And I wasn't ashamed of that. I thought I had cried all the tears I could, but grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, a slow, persistent ache that visits you in the middle of making coffee, or when you reach for a second mug out of habit. Weeks went by. Then months. I kept moving. I kept living. But something inside me had shifted. My laughter came back, but it sounded different. I met friends for brunch, listened to podcasts, filled my days with work. But there was a small, silent space in me that stayed untouched, the part where he lived. Then one afternoon, almost a year later, I walked past the coffee shop. I hadn't planned to stop. I hadn't even meant to be on that street. But something pulled me in. The bell above the door still jingled the same way. The barista had changed. The plants looked a little droopier. I ordered a cappuccino and sat in the same seat by the window. And then I saw him. Daniel. He looked older, tired. His eyes searched the room like they used to. Then they landed on me. Neither of us smiled right away. It wasn't a movie moment. It was real, a little awkward. But he walked over. "Hi," he said. "Hi." He asked if he could sit. I nodded. We didn't talk about what happened right away. We talked about everything else. Travel, work, how strange the world had become. Eventually, the silence fell between us, and in that quiet, I said, "I missed you." He looked down, then back at me. "I never stopped thinking about you." There were no promises, no dramatic gestures. Just two people sitting at the place where it all began. I don't know what happens next. But for now, we're here. And maybe that's enough. Seeing him again stirred up more than I expected. I had rehearsed so many versions of this moment in my head, what I'd say, how I'd feel, whether I'd be angry or calm. But when it actually happened, it wasn't like any of that. It was just human. We didn't rush into anything. We exchanged numbers again, but with no pressure. He texted me 2 days later asking if I wanted to grab dinner. I hesitated before saying yes, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wasn't sure if I could handle losing him again. At dinner, he was different, softer, more present. He asked questions and actually listened. I noticed how he looked at me, like someone trying to understand, not fix. He told me about the therapy he started months ago, how he finally faced some of the fears that had always haunted him. I could hear the effort in his voice, like every word was a choice. I told him I'd been writing more, journaling mostly, trying to make sense of everything. We talked about what we'd both been through, separately and together. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was two people acknowledging that healing isn't linear, and sometimes people drift not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to stay. As we said goodbye that night, he didn't try to kiss me. He just hugged me, long, honest, and warm. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt seen. Life didn't magically transform after that dinner, but something inside me shifted again. I stopped waiting for answers I'd never get and began paying attention to the ones I already had. Seeing Daniel again brought closure I didn't know I needed, not because we had fixed everything, but because we had both changed and finally admitted it to each other. Over the next few weeks, we messaged occasionally, a meme here, a photo there, small check-ins that felt light but meaningful. We weren't rushing back into a relationship. There was no talk of us, no labels, just a gentle recognition that something still connected us, even if neither of us knew what to do with it yet. One Saturday, he asked if I wanted to take a walk. No agenda, just some fresh air and conversation. I said yes. We met at a park near my apartment, one I hadn't been to since we split. The trees were turning, golden and orange, and the air was crisp. I brought coffee. He brought his old leather jacket. We talked about his father, how he passed away a few months earlier, and how that shook him in ways he didn't expect. He said he felt like everything he'd been running from finally caught up to him, and therapy helped him face it. I listened, really listened. And when I spoke, he did the same. We didn't talk about the past too much. We didn't need to. The way he looked at me said enough. The way I didn't flinch when he paused mid-sentence told him I wasn't holding on to resentment anymore. We kept walking, and somewhere along the path, our hands found each other. It wasn't dramatic, just natural, familiar. He squeezed my fingers gently. I didn't pull away. Later, as we sat on a bench watching a kid try to fly a kite, he turned to me and said, "I'm not asking to start over. I'm asking to start from here." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. And I realized, maybe that's what love becomes when you've been through enough. It's not flowers or fireworks. It's presence. It's someone showing up not just for the good parts, but for the messy, uncertain ones too. We didn't define anything that day. We didn't need to. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, a new rhythm formed. We didn't try to rebuild what we had before. We built something different, something quieter, wiser, real. I still had hard days, days when I doubted him, myself, the path we were on. But now, when those moments came, I spoke up. And so did he. We learned that staying requires effort, patience, and a willingness to be seen without armor. We met each other again, but as new people, not clinging to what was, but curious about what could be. It wasn't about fixing the old version of us. It was about accepting who we had become and seeing if that version fit. Sometimes, I'd wake up next to him and just watch him sleep for a moment. Not because I was trying to memorize it, like I had in the past when I was afraid it would disappear, but because I was at peace. There was no rush, no fear, just presence. And looking back now, I still think about that first Thursday, about how random it all seemed. But I no longer believe in coincidences. Some people come into your life like a flash of light, bright, overwhelming, and gone too soon. Others arrive slowly, like a soft rain after a long drought. Daniel was both. And I was lucky enough to find him, not once, but twice. Not every story has a perfect ending, but sometimes it has the right one. And for me, this, whatever it is, wherever it leads, feels like exactly that.